So I'm here today, right now, at the Toowoomba Chronicle. Tom Gillepsie has reached out to me and is apparently going to ask me some tough questions. Let's see how he does interviewing me, and let's see how tough these questions are.
Awesome. Beauty. All right. Excellent. So no candidates have gotten look at the questions. So it's.
I'm not worried.
Yeah. I didn't think you were. Yours. And then after we're done with these, we'll go next door and you can do your 1 minute pitch video.
Sure.
And also we'll get some extra photos. And then we're done. Nice and easy.
Awesome.
There we go.
How's work been treating you?
Look, it's been hectic. This campaign's been pretty wild. Beauty. Alright, mate. So we're all on the record now, so we'll just get stuck into it. Ryan, tell us about your background and what has shaped your political views.
Well, I'm a nobody. I come from an agricultural background. My parents have a farm, macadamia farm, up on the sunny coast. I ended up moving here for university and for work about 8 years ago. And what's shaped my political views? I suppose I've, like a lot of young people, have gotten quite, disinterested in politics, because it doesn't seem like we get enough of a voice, enough of a say, or get to participate in our democracy in a meaningful way. So when I was approached by my friend Brett to run for the Australian Federation Party, and I saw that their platform was community communication and engagement, I thought that was a fantastic initiative to be pushing, and getting some of my very, very opinionated and closely held beliefs out there in the conversation as well.
And what are some of those beliefs?
Well, I think that the climate change debate is too centered around carbon and not enough on industrial and agricultural pollution and microplastics, for example, in our waterways and the oceans. There's so many other things with our environment that are wrong than just carbon. And there appears to be a carefully constructed debate, with one side being, the fossil fuel industry and the other side being the renewable industry, and they're both profiting massively from it. And the renewables that are being promoted, such as solar and wind, are actually not green, and they're not renewable, and they're not recyclable, because they use non-renewable and non-recyclable components, and they end up as toxic landfill within half a century. So it's not a long-term sustainable model. And what I would really like to see is more long-term planning and passionate community engagement, and making sure people are on board with some of the decisions that are being made, because I feel like a lot of people are very, very angry and fed up with the way that they're being represented in our country.
Okay, great. Second question is, what is your top priority for the next term of government if you're elected?
My top priority, along with the Australian Federation Party, is actually proposing and bringing to Canberra our drafted Bill of Rights. Now, this is actually available on our website. We've published it. Everyone's able to read it. And what we would be doing is we'd be trying to initiate a referendum in order to secure our basic human rights here in Australia, because we do not have a Bill of Rights. And our few rights that we do have are afforded by our Constitution and are often trampled anyway. And I would like to see the mandates and the way that the COVID-19 response was handled undergo a review, and some of the people who are pushing those policies be held accountable for all of the damage they've done to the average person and small businesses and livelihoods, such as my own. Well, I was a teacher. I studied education for 4 years, and I've been stood down because of these mandates. I'm still technically employed by the Department of Education, so I can't get a new job without resigning. I don't want to, based off of principles. And Albanese is saying, we'll pay people to study $48,000 to study education and become teachers. Well, we've got a teacher shortage, that much is clear, and the government is really desperate for teachers, so why are they standing down people like myself who have genuine medical reasons for not taking the vaccine?
Right. You said that the people who have been pushing the mandates, they should be held accountable as part of a review. When you say
like for example, Anastasia
Palaszczuk
just made coercive control illegal in Queensland. And she listed all of these different things, access to money, using coercion to force people to do things that they don't want to do, using intimidation, all these tactics that the Queensland government has been putting on their own citizens. And I think it's a bit ironic that they're saying, oh yeah, in a domestic violence situation, this kind of coercive control should be legal and should be, people should be prosecuted for that. But she's been doing that to the Australian people for the last 2 years. So I'd like to see her answer whether or not she's been using coercive control as part of her pandemic response plan.
Sure. As you've already stated, you've been involved in the Toowoomba freedom movement. You've been at rallies, you've been part of protests, that sort of thing.
Sure.
This issue has dropped off the national agenda, and that's a statement of fact. Why do you think Groom voters will still care about this?
Because the mandates aren't over. They're only temporarily shut down so that they can look good for their elections. It's the electoral cycle propagandizing. They will still continue with the mandates. They will still continue with the COVID hysteria. Of that I'm certain, but they're just on pause for the moment because they don't want to lose voters to the minor parties and independents who are pushing back against these very, very poorly managed decisions.
So you think after May 21 they'll...
Not necessarily May 21, but coming up into winter, we will go through another wave, and we're seeing huge spikes in schools and other communities. In WA, there was how many tens of thousands of cases. They're going to be bringing the lockdowns back. Of that, I'm confident. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that. A lot of people have been saying, oh, it's over, the lockdowns are finished, the mandates are done, but I don't believe that for a split second. And we don't have any legal promise of that. And the Australian Federation Party would be promising that as part of their primary platform.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the AFP, because that's my next question.
Sure.
They're advocating for a decentralised sort of model that allows individual MPs to hold their constituents on key issues, to formulate their agendas in Canberra. That would be a fair and accurate representation of the part of the party's structure. Is that be fair?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, okay.
There used to be the Australian Country Party back in the day, the old Australian Country Party, and then they became the National Party, and some of the members weren't so happy about being assimilated into the LNP coalition, and so, we're standing up for the National Party values that they used to hold of supporting farmers and domestic manufacturing and putting our country's interests to the table.
Well, in terms of that model of a decentralised polling constituents in a country where political literacy leaves a lot to be desired, what makes you think that this is the best model?
I think that this is better because it allows the individual candidate to actually represent the community then and their constituents against the party towing line. However, the candidates have been pre-selected to make sure that we do have a uniting ethos and a banner under which we can all agree with. And the idea of having the Australian Federation Party as a network of support for independent candidates is to hold those independent candidates accountable. There's a lot of independents all across Queensland, all across this country that are running in this election, but there's nothing that's holding them to their promises or holding them under a common banner or an ethos like the Australian Federation Party is proposing that would allow voters who are maybe unfamiliar with these independents to see what they stand for. So it's all of the benefits of independence and all the benefits of a party and bring them together. And I think that's actually a really refreshing take that the Australian Federation Party is bringing to this election specifically.
Sure. Do you think that people will be responsive to that sort of thing? Because it requires a great deal more political involvement than a lot of people are willing to engage in at this point.
That's okay. I'm willing to fight for that, and I'm very, very happy with our 6-part community pact, which would have me as the representative hold a monthly town hall meeting, as they did for millennia before the modern era, where people would actually get to have a conversation with the representative, with their sitting member, and with an open agenda, they'd be able to see how I'm representing them and come to me with any concerns or issues or questions and have a more involved process, because I think that part of the issue is there isn't enough education around the electoral process and there isn't enough involvement. And the second part of the community pact is that We'd be holding democracy education seminars on how to vote, on what is the difference between the House of Representatives and the Senate, and all of these different rules with voting and how the preferences even work. A lot of people still believe that the parties actually provide the preferences and they take their votes and throw them towards other parties when they don't. All they do is provide how to vote cards, which are suggestions to their voters and their supporters. This is how we would like you to vote. And then the voter actually numbers their preferences, and the voter chooses where their second vote, if their first party doesn't get in, or their second or third, will end up going to. And most people, they don't know this. Pauline Hanson's One Nation with their political cartoons has actually been doing a pretty good job, I thought, in trying to get that message out there for this election. But that needs to be an ongoing process, and not just for the electoral cycle. It should be taught in our schools. And as a teacher, I know that this is not taught in our schools, at least not competently.
Great. And Robert, I've got one more question, mate. What is your 20-year vision for Groom and Toowoomba? What does it look like, and how do we get there?
20-year vision for Groom. See, that's a very long way away into the future.
Sure.
And I think that it is important to look at that, because most politicians only have a 3-year plan ahead for their electoral cycle. I would like to see some of the invasive exotic species such as camphor replaced with native species, which could support people struggling with the rising cost of living, or the homeless, or even our native wildlife that can't eat a lot of these decorative plants that we put up around, and it takes a long time for them to grow. That's something I would look at. Expand the community gardens as well. I think that we have a community gardens which is really quite amazing, but most people don't even know it's there. Most people never visit it. And if we were to expand that, say, to Queen's Park or Laurel Bank Park, just a small section to start off with, and then grow out from there and see how we go, that would be fantastic. I would like to see something more like what the Netherlands is doing, or some other places in New Zealand, or even Rockhampton, where they have community farming and everyone has their own veggie garden, and they do a harvest swap. So they don't need to go to Coles or Woolies or these giant corporate conglomerates to get their daily bread, and they could in fact grow it for themselves. I think that would also be a massive benefit to mental health and to community, just I suppose, spirit. There's a lot of animosity and strangeness from people not even knowing who their neighbours are, and I would like to host more community events. We used to have community country dances where young people would go out and they would dance and have like old line dancing and whatnot, and that was fantastic, because everyone then would get to know each other, and there'd be more trust and more helping out, your fellow neighbour. And I think that's really sad that we've lost that and replaced that with social media, which is quite a shallow form of social networking.
Sure. Too easy. I think we're done here, mate. And now we're going to go over next door and do our 1 minute pitch for you.
G'day everyone, this is Ryan. I just had my interview with the Chronicle. It was very short, but it went well. And I'm hoping that they do me justice. I probably shouldn't have such hopes just to have them dashed, but it felt good. And I think I answered all of the questions pretty well. So we'll see how that comes out of the woodworks in the next couple of days. So stay tuned for that. Cheers, bye.
G'day, I'm Ryan Otto. I'm representing the Australian Federation Party here in Groom, and I'm trying to shake things up a bit, trying to bring some things that are quite unusual to the conversation. I'd like to see a more representative democracy here. I'd be interested in representing you and getting your opinion on how Groom can change for the better. I'd like to be supporting our farmers and making sure that our policies, our planned future infrastructure would be in line with the expectations and needs of private homeowners and landowners. And one of the interesting things that we'd be bringing to the table, which has not yet actually been brought, is a referendum to change our constitution to recognise the Indigenous peoples of this country. And I think that's a fantastic initiative, and I'm very, very proud to be supporting the Australian Federation Party here in Toowoomba. I would love your support to try and get me to Canberra, to try and change the conversation and try and shake things up. Thank you very much.